So before I end, I would like to introduce a great teacher, a person who is everything. When I made my documentary, I was scratching my head and saying, whom do I show that it is acceptable? Something stupid I made. The one person's name kept on revolving in my head. The only one person who can be familiar, and I've heard about it, I've read about it, and I read about his book in which he has written about music, Tabiat. He wrote about his music and medicine. So I very hesitantly took his appointment, went and told Sir, I made this documentary, do you mind seeing it? He left his chair, came and sat next to me. I was moved. My heart was thumping, my blood pressure must have shot up. I started showing him my documentary. He watched it carefully. At the end of it, I said, "Sir, how was it?" "Fantastic. Those were the most healing sound I had heard. And as a Bania, I wanted to have a little more. Can you inaugurate this audiovisual for me?" I said, "Yes. You fix up with my secretary. I'm going out of town. Arrange a date accordingly." It's a privilege to introduce Dr. Farokh Udwadia. I'm inadequate to introduce him. His laurels are known to you. His name is known to you. His academic work is known to you. But to briefly just cover up, he is awarded Padma Bhushan by Government of India. He is awarded B.C. Roy for his teaching abilities. He is awarded Dhanvantari Award for his contribution to medicine. He was instrumental in establishing tetanus ward in JJ Hospital, which reduced the mortality. Once upon a time, I have seen patients dying of tetanus. And his contribution was that tetanus, the mortality went from 80 to 20%. He was instrumental in establishing a critical care unit at Bridge Candy Hospital, where late Annapurna Devi got a new life under his care. Wait. He has written 2 plays, professionally produced and performed. His play, Onanga, Oganna, is on Albert Schweitzer, Nobel Prize winner, physician who spent his life in equatorial Africa, living all the luxuries in Europe. His another play was performed 2 months back. Was a doctor where Boman Irani acted as Rustam Irani. And at the end of the play, he had a standing ovation. His book Tabiat, as I mentioned, consists of various esoteric subjects, and music and medicine is one chapter. He is a true doctor. He believes that dealing with human suffering, read poetry, literature, get a good idea of what suffering is. If you can appreciate your patient's suffering, then only you can treat patients. He further states that medicine is an art and science. Curing and healing are not exactly synonymous. Curing is the science when you cure a person of a disease or infection. But healing involves a mind-body complex. And that's an important distinction. And healing lasts much longer and it takes time. And doctor-patient relationship is a key for the healing a patient. If I want to describe his career in just short words, I would say there are three P's: passion, patience, and persistence. He has received number of awards. He has written beautiful literature. Academically, he is extremely good. He is the person who wrote a book on eosinophilia and respiratory disease. His medical emergencies was in subcontinent of Asia. It was the first book which was published. He is a musician and a painter. Despite all these achievements, he is a humble doctor. For a person like him, I am reminded of a quote by Tony Robbins. His passion is the genesis of genius. Thank you very much, Dr. Udwadia.
Dr. Ashit Sheth, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to talk on music. Music of which I'm really passionately fond. Including in this talk also will be music and medicine, but I am going to give you an overall perspective of music. I'm going to start with a quotation. In this world, there is nothing so close to prayer as music is. Music is an innate feature of the human psyche. It is deeply rooted in human nature. And it remains a fundamental aspect of practice and tradition, an attribute in the human species. Millions of people today listen to music. You have music in concert halls, theaters, on your computer. You have music on your phone, you have music in temples, you have music in churches. Music all the time. Millions of people have been affected by music. Some have a lifetime of music, particularly those in the entertainment industry. And almost everyone in one's lifespan has had good experiences with music. We listen to music. We keep time to music. We sing, we dance, we sway when music makes us do so. There's music all the time. In fact, the world is filled with the sound of music. You know, when did music appear? As Doctor has said, there is no culture in this world that has ever been without music. It began with Paleolithic man. You observe paintings on cave walls made by Paleolithic man of dancing men and women. And on the floor has been found bones, the femur, so fashioned and so cut so that it serves as a flute. So basically, music and dancing were born together for all practical purposes. Paleolithic man also drew animals on the walls, showing their activity mainly hunting, enabling them, picturing them so that they could identify them and hunt for them. Music was interwoven, however, with all activity even at that age. So the influence of music in that age can never really be determined, but it must have been quite a lot. And then came the minstrel, singing songs of past, of glory, of virtue, of morals, of great people in the past. And that's how language became, and that's how speech became. It gave a cohesiveness to society and a support to the individual to help him face the vicissitudes of life and living. Now we may ask, what does music do? And there's a man, or rather an erudite person who's written a lot on music called Storr, Dr. Storr, S-T-O-R-R. And he said, music communicates with people. A rather very mundane and plebeian statement compared to, for example, the great composer Stravinsky, not so modern, in the 30s, when he said, music is a communion between man and his fellow men, and a communion with the eternal spirit. That's a beautiful way how music acts. Now, there is a saying that the beginning of music led to an adaptability of humans. I am not quite sure what it really means. But when we come down to brass tacks, we know that the human brain is so constructed that it can distinguish music from noise. And how does it do that? It does that because it can recognize tones, it can recognize tunes, it can recognize rhythm, and it can recognize different musical expressions. But how does it do that? I think all art is a manifestation of the internal innate psyche of a human being. An expression which has so evolved over time that it had left its imprint, as I say, on the DNA of the human species. That's the best way I can explain it. How did music originate? What is the origin of music? I love the origin of Indian music. All things great and beautiful in India are attributed to the gods, to religion, to philosophy. So music is the gift of the gods. Sound is of two sorts, according to Indian philosophy, Indian religion. Sound produced by the vibration of ether. Sound produced by the vibration of ether is the delight of the gods. Pythagoras of Greece called it the sound of the spheres, spheres meaning the heavenly bodies. And the second sound is a sound produced by the vibration of air. That is the sound produced by man. Now, is there a relation between the two? And this is really beautiful. The first note that you hear, remember, doesn't come by itself. It emerges from the silence that has preceded it. And the last note that you hear is not the last note. It is really a note which is followed by silence which follows it. That's a beautiful thought. Now, if you look at it metaphysically, it is even more beautiful. Perhaps you could say that we are not just isolated beings. We have come from the Supreme Being. We live our existence and go back to the Supreme Being. So that's how it is, ladies and gentlemen. Now, the Western world, it's not that they are not religious, it's not that they are not philosophical. They're rather logical, and they wanted a reason for it. How did music originate? Was it from the brooks, water running in the brooks, the streams, the rustling of the wind through the trees, the leaves, etc.? Not really. Not really. Was it a bird song? Beautiful bird song. The thrush, the bird thrush, is supposed to have been capable of singing 7 songs differently and mixed up together. But if that had been so, primitive man would have been singing like the birds. But it's far from it. What came first? Speech or song? Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who was the father of the French Revolution, said that it was song which preceded speech. And Charles Darwin also thought that it was music that came first and speech came next. But the current view of how music is supposed to have started, according to the West, is remarkable. They say that it is the prosodic exchange between the mother and the infant, the sound that the mother makes and the child makes in return, which forms the basis of music. I find that difficult to understand. So let's say for all practical purposes, it's difficult to find out how music really originated. But we must remember that nothing stands still in the world. The history of the world is a chronicle of change, and the history of music also is a chronicle of change. So music evolved. In our world, in India, for example, from the hymns in the Vedas to what we have the ragas today, and even their modification in current modern practice. Whereas in the Western world, there were the Gregorian chants, very much like the Buddhist chants. Chants by groups of people who would chant, chant, chant. That was their music. But it's unimaginable that this primitive chant has evolved into music which is played by numbers of instruments, by numerous people, sometimes all sitting together in huge concert halls, where people of 100 people make music, playing symphonies for people to listen to and to admire, and also for people playing in groups or people playing singly as virtuosos. So music unquestionably has evolved. I want to talk now of music and the mind. The sound waves produced by music go through the external ear into the tympanic membrane, into the eardrum. The eardrum vibrates, it activates the ossicles, which activates the cochlea, the hair in the cochlea, and that activates conduction through the auditory nerve. Now, the appreciation of music, the decoding of music, is really not to be put to one center anatomically. There are numerous connections, and probably the interplay and the interconnections between the centers gives you really the picture of what music is. Anyway, for example, pitch is supposed to be in the temporal lobe. Chords, pitches are all placed together, also in the temporal lobe. And pitch in time means melody. Harmony also is in the temporal lobe. And next to it, close to that, is a center which appreciates timbre. Timbre is the quality of sound. two people singing the same tune, the timbre, the quality of the sound may be different. That is timbre. Rhythm is supposed to be in the cerebellum. Emotive parts of music are supposed to be in the frontal lobes. Music also stimulates the reward centers, which are present in the hypothalamus and near and about the hypothalamus. But the most important thing, which I find impossible to answer, how are sound waves? Different amplitude, different wavelengths, different frequency. How are those sound waves decoded in the brain and made into music? This is really a mystery which science really has. I mean, you can give any amount of explanation, but how? What is the mechanism? What is the neurochemistry which makes these sound waves produced in different forms, mixed up sometimes, and translated in what we hear as music? I think it is really a mystery which needs, I think, to be solved. Question arises now that music, injury to the brain or damage to the brain can produce changes in musicality. And I'd like to give you some examples. A great neurologist called MacDonald Critchley, I think in the 1930s, late 30s or so, described what is called musicogenic epilepsy, which means one of his patients, for example, hearing music, suddenly had a fit. He was a great art critic. He was a great music critic. That was his livelihood. That was his profession. And he found that sooner or later that every time he heard some sort of music, he would get a fit. And ultimately it came to the point where the slightest music produced an epileptic seizure, either a full seizure or a temporal lobe epilepsy or what we call a petit mal. He had to give up his profession. There is another extremely unusual phenomenon which I read about, and that's called musicophilia. It's quite interesting. There was a man speaking at a telephone booth outside a railway station, and he had a cardiac arrest. There was another man waiting to use the telephone booth. He was a doctor. He resuscitated the individual completely. The man got completely well. The man who had a cardiac arrest was quite well. In about 10, 12 days' time, he was able to move about. And then a peculiar phenomenon happened. He started hearing music in his brain. And they were all thought that he was hallucinating. And he was not particularly interested in classical music, in Western classical, but he heard Western classical music, particularly by a particular composer, playing all the time in his brain. And he couldn't understand it. He then learned to notate the music, and he notated the music after that with his own hand of what he was playing. He was particularly fond of Chopin, and he was particularly fond of a particular musician called Ashkenazi, playing Chopin. So he became really a classical musician. And in course of time, in 6 months' time, he gives a recital which was appreciated by all people who heard him. Isn't that amazing? It just goes to show that there is very, very little we know of the brain. It is one organ in the body about which we, by and large, are fairly ignorant. And then let me tell you of the third very important and very unusual one, called the Mozart effect. The Mozart effect. Mozart was a genius with regard to composition and playing the piano. He started playing at the age of 4, and he composed great music, mind you, at the age of 6. Unbelievable. It really makes you believe, for those who are unbelievers, that there must be a God above who must have given this man, this little boy, this talent. What is the Mozart effect? If you take little children and play Mozart every day to them for some days, weeks or so, perhaps weeks, you find that there's a marked increasing effect on cognition, which is proved, documented, compared to a group of students who was playing some other mundane, commonplace music. And this music lasted this improvement in cognition lasted for quite some time, but did not last permanently. It sooner or later went away. But what would happen, for example, if little children were played this again and again every day for a long time? Would it perhaps affect cognition on a long-term basis? Not just Mozart alone, other music as well. It has also been shown with Hindustani music. The sarod, for example, if played again and again to a group of students, it was found their cognition also improved. In other words, music affects cognition. And it is important because those who are able to experience music frequently or musical experiences frequently, perhaps would have better cognition than those who do not. It hasn't been proved, but it is a point worth mentioning. Now, where in the brain is music heard? You see, speech, spatial recognition, logic is, in a right-handed person, is in the left hemisphere, left half of the brain. But music, by and large, is appreciated on the right side of the brain, the right hemisphere, which controls emotion, song, and music. And this has been shown. For example, a man who is paralyzed by a stroke affecting the left half of the brain can appreciate music. The greatest is a story of a musician, a composer, a nondescript composer, who had sensory aphasia to a lesion in the left temporal lobe. And it was found that though he had sensory aphasia, that means he could not understand the meaning of the spoken word. He could compose, not only understand music, appreciate music, but he could compose music. And he composed a full symphony in Western music, which Shostakovich said was excellent. This is indeed remarkable. Stammering, for example, is related to the left half of the brain. But if a stammerer is suddenly moved by something and he knows song, he can break into song and will not stutter or stammer at all, because the appreciation of music and song is in the right cerebral hemisphere. So it's an interesting thing to remember. And finally, I must tell you the funny story of a disturbance in the brain produced by diffuse damage to the brain. This was reported by Oliver Sacks, who's written quite a lovely books on this aspect of music, where a man mistook a hat for his wife. Yes, what happened was the man could see, but he could not recognize what he saw. But amazingly, his musical sensibility remained the same, good. So that, he was so lost that he would be singing all the time. He would be singing when shaving, singing when wearing his clothes, singing when bathing. It was his only contact to the outside world, which otherwise was completely shattered. And yet, music sensibility prevailed. I want to tell you now something about the power of music. It is now well known that music can increase intellectuality, perceptibility, and increase the personal growth and the social well-being of children and young adults. Susan Hallag is the lady, who's written a beautiful book on that and a beautiful treatise on that. And it's remarkable. And how does it do that? the most important thing she noted was that music and the appreciation of music and the experience of music can affect other cerebral functions. That's remarkable. Now, as I said, we know very little about the brain, but let me tell you some basic facts, those who are not doctors. The basic cell is a neuron. And there are 100 billion neurons in the brain. Can you believe it? In that small box of the skull, within the brain, there are 100 billion neurons. And each of these neurons has 1,000 interconnections. So you can see how complex the network of fibers and cells within the brain is. Now, how is it that musical appreciation can affect her cerebral function? Susan Alec has a view. It says this is because the cerebral cortex self-organizes itself. Let me just explain that. When you hear music, it is transmitted by the interconnecting neurons. Interconnecting neurons through interconnecting fibers, after a length of time, become reinforced, become modified for the better, become fine-tuned to a point where the cortex self-organizes itself so it is capable of processing information that it relieves. And this self-organization of the cortex produced by musical experiences can be transferred to other activities. For example, music and speech are close to each other, and the processes involving them are similar to each other. Therefore, self-organization of the cortex produced through music can affect language. If it affects language, it affects speech, it affects writing. And that, of course, is unquestionably a great advantage. Isn't it remarkable that music appreciation in the cortex produces a change in the cortex which can affect other cerebral functions? It reminds me of the great researchers who showed that you have jumping genes in bacteria. So a gene from a nasty bacteria can jump into a bacterium which has reasonably normal genes and make that bacterium resistant to antibiotics. It's amazing. But this is, I think, illustrates very well the power of music. Then we come to music and medicine. Music has a calming effect. Relieves stress, has a soothing effect, reduces pain, has an effect which allows you to reduce medications given for pain. It is used, therefore, in many chronic conditions. Cancer, for example. Patients benefit when they hear music all the time. Any chronic condition benefits from that. How does it do that? It reduces the stress hormones. It can reduce the blood pressure. It can reduce the pulse rate. It can reduce skin conductance. It can reduce body temperature. The diminution of stress hormones, therefore, relieves stress in individuals who are stressed. And who is not stressed in the world of today? So the world of music can reduce stress for everyone, all of us concerned, if we are good enough to listen to it for a length of time. It's used preoperatively to calm the patient, make sure that the pulse rate and the blood pressure do not rise. It is used post-operative for the same purpose. It is used by the surgeon intraoperatively. It's used by the surgeon intraoperatively because it has a calming effect on the surgeon also. Most important from the point of view of medicine, it has a remarkable effect on movement. I think movement is extremely important. Movement activates the fibers controlling movement. Movement particularly, like for example you walk outside, keeps you in touch with the external environment and therefore is also responsible for cognition. Now how I, as somebody who practices medicine and observes things, notice this. Take an elderly man who is reasonably all right in his head, reasonably well. He falls down, he has a fracture, a bad fracture, and he's laid up in bed for 6 weeks. In bed, no movement at all. When he gets up, you find there is a marked deficiency in his cognition. And you're surprised. What is he doing? He's forgetting everything. He doesn't know anything of. The reason is lack of movement. So, ladies and gentlemen, I cannot stress to you the importance of movement. And the simplest way you can move is to walk. That is why walking is such a healthy exercise. It stimulates your moving, it helps your cognition, it is a truly worthy exercise. Now there are certain diseases, I don't know whether I should get into that, but for example, even stuttering and stammering, for example, is a movement disorder in a way. Music helps it. There are rare diseases called Tourniquet's disease, which was described by Tourniquet, in which you have tics, sometimes violent tics. At least one related to the is a motor tic and one related to speech or the vocal cords. But they have many tics. So they may be screaming sometimes as a tic or making funny odd movements all the time as a result of tic, and extremely exhausting. Music helps them. An amazing thing, listening to music is not half as great as playing music. Now, if a person has this particular disease and is learned to play an instrument and is made to play that, this particular manifestations of this disease is much reduced. There are other movement disorders also. I don't want to go into that. It's widely technical and I don't need to say, but most important for them is the use of music in Parkinson's disease. It's a great help in Parkinson's disease. Movement, besides walking, musical movements to music, dancing, and other musical effort. People think that, just walking is the right thing for, but there is much more to it than that. If, for example, you walk to music, that's fine. But you can have musical exercises. You can raise your voice from like that. You're using your vocal cords, and the vocal cords do not function well in patients with Parkinson's disease. Or, for example, musical activity together, moving your hands and legs to music. These are all things which one should advise patients with Parkinson's disease. And repeated auditory activity is very useful. You therefore have repeated auditory stimulation. Now, it's easy to have repeated auditory. The simplest way, but a rather dull way, is a metronome which gives time. And you can use that metronome to mark time. But the best way is to have a musical expression, which is more or less in conjunction with the steps that the patient takes. And he takes those steps according to time. So those very shuffled steps can be made a little bigger. It helps in gait, it helps in balance, it helps in walking, and it helps the patient not to suddenly freeze as they suddenly do. I think, to me, the greatest advice on music therapy is in patients with Parkinson's disease, where repeated auditory stimulation, besides the usual walking and dancing, etc., Repeated auditory stimulation, so regulated according to the patient's needs and the patient's step and the amount of steps he makes and the length of the step, helps Parkinson's disease a great deal. Is there any other? There are other very many reasons in many conditions in medicine. It is so important now, why? First of all, let me tell you, how does music act in medicine? How is it? What is the mechanism of it? The first mechanism is that it stimulates the reward center. The reward center is just not the hypothalamus, it's the amygdala nucleus, the thalamus, and even the frontal lobes. These are the reward centers. When they are stimulated, they ask for more. Music sometimes gives you a real thrill. Good music, great music gives a little thrill. And that thrill stimulates the reward center. And the reward center wants more, so he wants more music. Just as the person is addicted to cocaine. Why does he go on wanting cocaine? Why does he go on eating chocolates? Why does he go on eating smoking? Why does he go on drinking alcohol? All these are addictive factors which give a thrill, stimulating the reward center. That's why you get addicted to it. The second is a modulation of the brainstem reflexes, so that the music acts on the brainstem reflexes, slowing the heart, reducing the blood pressure, reducing skin conductance, reducing temperature. These are all brainstem reflexes. And music acts through the brainstem, modifying them. But the most important of all, which is a recent piece of research, music acts on the immunological system. This is fantastic. The immunological. Music is supposed to act, and there are many studies on this, mind you. I can't report them, but I've read some of them. Music is supposed to act on the neuroendocrine center. The neuroendocrine center is like a conductor of the immune system of the body. So when it acts on this neuroendocrine center, which controls immune reactions, and if your immune reactions are stimulated, it is a good sign. You may recover early, easy. So that's a point worth remembering. And finally, music affects social awareness. Social awareness is important. Social awareness is good for mental health, and music encourages that. That's why music is performed sometimes in a group, very often in a group. And it is believed that there are hormones, finally, can you believe it, that regulate that. One of them is oxytocin, and the other is vasopressin. It is said that you know a fair deal of the neuroanatomy of music, but we know very little about the neurochemistry of music. Finally, last, I think, but not the least, something which I'm very fond of. What is the meaning of music? What is it meant to be? Can it affect morals? Can it affect character? The answer is yes. And this is believed to the work of Plato, the great Greek philosopher, who said good music affects good morals and character because it infuses order and harmony into the soul. And he also said that bad music has a reverse effect. Bad music has a reverse effect. So what is good music? I think if you can look at it, and Plato looked at it this way, great music. Great music is absolutely something which sends you into a trance. It makes you commune within yourself. It communes with the Supreme Being. Great, transcendental music. Let's call it that. Good music is one which makes you happy, which helps you, which makes you forget your troubles and your worries. You can fight difficulties and problems that affect you. Then you have medium music, which you hear in lifts, you hear otherwise, which you can do your work anywhere and you can hear it and forget about it. But bad music is one which is raucous, loud, noise, not music. And often in that noise you hear a voice mouthing vulgarities and profanities. Can you ban this now? Answer is no. Not in this world, where there is a great deal of free thought, free words, and free deeds, short of murder and grave robbery. You're free to do anything. So how can you ban it? And what the proponents of such music say? Music evolves, they say. Music has evolved. So what's wrong with it? This is how music evolves. Everything evolves. Hasn't art evolved? But there's a big difference. Big difference. For example, the great music of Bach has not been supplanted by Mozart, and the great music of Mozart has not been supplanted by Beethoven, and the great music of Beethoven has not been supplanted by Shostakovich. Music evolves, but the evolution of music should refine your senses and sensibilities, not poison them. The same in Indian music. The great, great hymns that were there evolved into ragas, and they're still evolving. But they refine your senses and they refine your sensibilities. That is the important thing. Now I ask you, and I've asked myself, what is it that an art which has no connection to the outside world, which has nothing to do with language, so that it can impart no knowledge of the outside world or anything else, which doesn't preach a doctrine? What is it, why is it that art has so interwoven itself into the fabric of human thought and human psyche that it has become part of human beings? Why? How? That is the question. And the philosopher answers it. He says that music mirrors the inner stream of your life, a stream that flows continuously from birth till the end of human existence. That is what he says. Of course, the music is like other arts, any other art, any other, because it is so aesthetic. But what is so different? Difference is you cannot see it. You can understand it, but you cannot translate it. You can comprehend it again, but again, you cannot translate it. And it gives you no outside knowledge of anything of this world or anything else. In fact, and this is so important, music has been equated sometimes to great mathematics. Can you believe it? Before I forget, I must say, there are two endeavors, shall I say, in the world where art and science mix. The first, of course, is medicine. Medicine is as much an art as it is a science. And the second, they say, is music and mathematics. You know, a great, great philosopher, Wittgenstein, I may not have heard of him, but I'll tell you. He said that when I read Bertrand Russell's Principia Mathematica, Bertrand Russell wrote that great work on mathematics called Principia Mathematica. He said, when I read this, it was so beautiful that I could liken it only to music. And another man, again a philosopher, in his Lowellian lecture said, modern mathematics today, to my mind, is indeed one of the greatest creations of the human spirit. The only one that can compete with it is music. Now, my interest in this was when I was reading the life of Ramanujan. Hardy had called Ramanujan over to Cambridge and they both worked together, both good musicians. Only Ramanujan was a genius. His equations have still not been completely solved. There are many which remain to be solved. But Hardy was a clever man, and this is what he said about mathematics. He said it has to have generality, which means it has no frontiers. It has to have depth, which it must not be mundane. It must act exactly as it should. It must have unexpectedness, and it must have economy. The same holds for music. Generality, depth, not an ordinary tune. Inevitability, it has to end in that manner. There's no way in which this music could end. Look at the difference. Inevitability in mathematics is logic. Inevitability in music is art. And unexpectedness is the beauty of a mind which can change tunes and chords and whatever it is, and etc. And it is also something linked to inevitability. Economy doesn't apply very much to music, particularly there are some composers like Wagner or Mahler, for example, in Western music, who cannot be called economically. But that doesn't matter. So what is great music? Great music is composed by great minds. It's telling you everlasting truths. Minds, composers, who go deep into their psyche. Deep, so that emotions and experience which are hidden are brought to the surface and expressed in beautiful forms of sound. That is what great music is. I want to end by just saying, I wish I could hear music much more than I used to. But I think I will. But when I used to hear very great music, what did it do to me? I sincerely, frankly felt an inner feeling that there is another world than the one we live in. I felt that I could commune with my inner conscious state. The stream that the philosopher said starts in the beginning and ends at your end of your existence. And I could commune perhaps with the Supreme Being at times, lost in a trance, hypnotized. In doing so, music adds greater meaning to life. A transcendental blessing that enhances, uplifts the spirit of man. Thank you.